If you're new here, welcome in, and if you know me, welcome back. And I've been working in sports media for about 7 years now. And you know this is something I love. I've wanted to be in sports media ever since I was in 7th grade. So whenever I hear something like this, I tend to geek out and want to talk about it. It's 3 in the morning. I saw Brian Windhorst be like, NBA media is not in a great place. Now he says because we're devaluing things that make the NBA great. And I totally agree. And this is really interesting because he's in an interesting spot, right? He works at ESPN. So a lot of quote tweets were about like calls coming from inside the house. We're like, my brother in Christ, you've been following LeBron James for a decade plus. But I think that of all the NBA talents or media talents to come out and say this, I really do think that Brian Windhorst is the one, like one of the more genuine on that side of like, oh, he actually really wants to cover more stories. Like he really likes the NBA. Like the fact this comes from Brian Windhorst, I actively believe him. He's like, I want us to cover other stuff. Before we keep going, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe on the video. The goal is to get 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And with your help, I could achieve that. That would be so cool. Anyway, we're going to continue. Now we're going to talk about a lot of facets of the NBA media in this video. And I really want to start with how media has changed over the years, right? We have to start with the newspaper era or the blog era. So ESPN has kind of shifted from journalism to like the talent themselves. But sports journalism and journalism in general, you didn't do something because it got the attention. You didn't do a story because you knew that the story would get a lot of attention. You did the story because that's the story. That's the journalism job. If there is a story to tell, you tell the story. Not because there's like, you really be like, oh, okay, well, this amount of people is going to like this, but this amount of people want to hear about this more. So it's not about that. And when you got the newspaper, it wasn't like oh, hey, I like the newspaper and I really like what's on page 17. That's not data that these newspaper people had like super big access to, where it was like, oh, do you like this kind of stories? Then we're going to do more of that kind of stories. But I feel like we're in an era where there's so much analytics, there's so much data, there's so much audience data being like, oh, a lot of people like this type of story, so we're going to keep continuing to do that. And I feel like that's where NBA media, at least national NBA media, has kind of backed themselves into a product of their own design. Now, I think a big part of this is the fact that not every NBA team is as visible as the others. As you can see, Lakers, Warriors, Celtics, Knicks, they get a lot of attention. But I'm more concerned about the 0 to 5 and the 6 to 10 range. I don't think that the Orlando Magic should only have 6 to 10 national TV games. And this really starts an ongoing cycle about how an NBA team doesn't get covered as much because the games aren't being shown to a national audience as much, and hence they don't get covered as much. And it kind of takes players or certain players to break the cycle, whatever. So as you can see, like Victor Wembanyama alone is one of the reasons why the Spurs got 21 to 25 nationally televised games. But I find it very interesting as to why certain teams pick and choose. Like why certain teams are able to be picked and chose. It's really interesting. Like I honestly think that Cleveland and Orlando, I know that those are teams that like aren't going to be talked about as much in the news media. I often feel like the national TV schedule should be a little bit more balanced. Just a little bit, just so casual watchers of the sport can know like, oh, this is what this team is up to, and not feel surprised when it comes playoff time. Be like, oh, Paolo Banchero is pretty good. How come I never saw that? How come no one ever alerted me of that? Because it hasn't been visible on TNT or ESPN or anything like that. And since they're not really shown on a national TV scale, they're not going to be talked about. And I know I'm going up against what a lot of people like, want to see, but I feel like that a better balance of the league in terms of nationally televised game would be so much healthier for the national media landscape as a whole. I think another underrated shift of all of this happened when Woj moved to ESPN. You see, when Woj was spoiling the draft for Yahoo and like spoiling trades and like breaking trades, it was seen as like whimsical fun, being like, haha, this guy is outsmarting the mouse, he's outsmarting ESPN, he's outsmarting the big honchos, he's releasing all the spoilers for the draft. Isn't that cool? And then when he moved to ESPN, it turned from being like a whimsical, fun little thing into like how we look at NBA content. It became interesting because I think after this, and when Woj and Shams or whatever, it felt like covering the NBA was more about rumors, more about trades, more about speculations, more about injuries, more about all of that. And it took away from everything except for the actual basketball part in and of itself. And the thing about trade stuff is that whenever you saw a small market star feeling disgruntled or whatever, you just be able to hit the old reliable, oh, what if they got traded to Miami? How would the LA trade work? And that's like pretty easy content to make, honestly, because you can just make stuff up. Honestly, you can be like, oh, I think that this would be a good scenario. Because when you're able to make scenarios out of thin air, if you're able to conjure them out of thin air, it's easy for you to be wrong about them. So you feel like you have more leeway to be wrong about these kinds of scenarios. And I feel like Woj, when he joined in 2017, of course, he was still breaking news and all of that stuff, but it often felt like whenever he was on TV, it would be more about all the stuff off the court. Well, when Woj got to ESPN, he's not really out here telling stories. He wasn't out there like Jeremy Schaap with E60. He was just listening to sources, copying and pasting whatever they told. Not copying and pasting, but you know what I'm saying. The landscape kind of changed. It became more about Woj versus Shams, and it kind of got insufferable. I know when you were a fan of a small market team and all the landscape cared about, or the national news landscape cared about, was if your best player was going to help another team be good. And I can't stress enough how annoying that is. It gets really annoying because now everybody starts to do that. When you see a disgruntled star, last year, I'm a Pistons fan. We got so many Cade Cunningham photoshops onto teams where it's not even realistic for him to get dealt there. But people are so chomping at the bit to get this good player that's not on their team so people can continue to be talking about that player, but in the concept of Los Angeles or concept of New York or whatever, big market. When that keeps happening, it's annoying. It's insufferable. And that's just the snowball of events that have happened because we have started to prioritize and valued the stuff that is not the actual basketball. That makes sense. I think another reason why NBA media feels so different now, or feels like they're not telling stories, is because the storytellers keep getting let go and replaced with like media talent or whatever. Like Zach Lowe is one of the best writers in the business, and ESPN was like, you know what? We need to spend our money elsewhere. That sends such a wild message to the rest of the landscape, I feel like, because I feel like with moves like this, it's you telling us that storytelling is not valuable compared to the hot takes and being entertaining. And that's the thing, where ESPN has let so many top tier writers and journalists go over the years. This hasn't been like a this year thing. It's been going on and on and on. I could name the list of talent that has journalism backgrounds, but I feel like more and more former players are replacing the top writers and stuff. Now, the former players and all of that, that's fine. I have no problem with that, but it's one of those things where it's like those former players are not interviewers. They're not writers. They're not going to go and write these stories and talk to, like, they're not going to do all of that. And if they did, they don't have the experience that someone like a Zach Lowe would have to be able to tell those stories that Brian Windhorst so wants to go back to that. It's one of the things where it's like ESPN has told us what they value. That's all. Another reason behind this is because ESPN's whole mentality shifted after a while. I mean, for a while, of course, like a lot of other journalistic sites and news outlets, the priority was link clicks, article clicks, how much time someone could stay on the page, advertising, all of that stuff. I don't know if you guys remember this ESPN layout, but there was something important about this because for a long time, ESPN's video was not on YouTube. I'm going to say that again. ESPN didn't really have a YouTube strategy because they wanted so many people to come to their site and watch directly on their site. It took them a while, but they finally switched that strategy. A little bit too late, I want to say. They've made up for it. It's fine. But this was the mentality for a long time, and that mentality has changed. So now that they're in the YouTube era, it's not what I said earlier about the newspaper thing where it's like making the story to tell the story. It's, hey, we want to talk about this because we know that the most eyes and ears are going to be focused on that. I also feel like the cycle is ESPN they play it too safe with their content a lot, and I feel like that alone has had a lot of people like lose faith in them, being like, wow, old ESPN used to just cover whatever and not really care about who watched what or what. I mean, and they did care, but it was like ESPN had way more experimental stuff. And even the stuff that was seen as experimental back then has since been copied and copied and copied to where it doesn't feel experimental now. Back when SportsCenter used to look like this, it was seen as very important, where that was the place where if you missed a highlight, if you missed a game, you had to basically, for the most part, you could watch SportsCenter and they would cover all of these games. But with the introduction of the bigger form of the internet, where sports highlights are visible on Twitter and all forms of social media, ESPN kind of had to pivot and be, well, if we just post the highlights, that's not really enough. Now, ESPN SportsCenter always had these kind of feature stories. They've always had these stories baked in, or interview segments, or hey, we have a reporter on the street outside of Buffalo, here's what they talked about the coaches. They've always had that baked in, but I feel like ESPN understood that if the highlights were just the highlight, like SportsCenter is not seen for just the highlights anymore. So ESPN kind of started pivoting over to narratives, right? And you all knew this was coming, but the First Take influence cannot be denied. What First Take taught us is that you really do not have to go anywhere below the surface to really capture the audience or whatnot. You could basically talk surface level stuff and rehash debate topics over and over for a long time, and it doesn't really matter, right? Like the LeBron versus Jordan debate, Dallas Cowboys, and all of that has been like, okay, yeah, First Take is going to play the hits, and you know that they're going to play the hits because it works, because those Holiday Inn Continental breakfast TVs are not going to turn themselves off anytime soon. And with First Take, they don't really take that many risks. They don't. And the math really does make sense. For a show to be on that long, that often, and try to cover as many sports as they can, I totally understand why they're not digging deep through the research and trying to have some really profound discoveries or going deep into the stats. I understand that playing the hits with these kind of shows makes sense. And that's why I want to say that I don't think there should be a national sports show that for this long covers all of the sports, because it doesn't really help. When you watch First Take and you see the difference between First Take and NFL Live, a show that is dedicated to covering the NFL and an NFL focus, it's just night and day in terms of the type of coverage, in terms of the type of stuff you learn. Even NBA today, it makes so much more of a difference versus when you're expecting one show to cover 4 different sports or 3 different sports. I do not think that this model helps. I understand why it's popular, but in terms of the NBA media storytelling, there's not really much room for storytelling. Instead of being able to focus on the stories, you constantly have to be like, rapid fire, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? Narratives. Does this narrative latch on to what I said 2 weeks ago? It's not sustainable if you like really want to get into the storytelling aspect. And topics like these kind of cemented it, being like, hey, if this is what's getting the traction, then we're just going to keep doing this, instead of focusing our energy onto anything else. Basically anything else would work. This, no. Anything else, yes. I think something that's also been another negative effect of the NBA media is definitely aggregation. For those of you that don't know, aggregation is when you take something from like an article or whatnot, and then you share it, and then just that part gets shared. Now, aggregation could be some type of thing where someone might take a quote or paragraph from an article and then tweet it, and then it gets put in a graphic by some other company or whatnot. That's where it kind of catches fire, right? Now, one of the number one culprits of this is the Dunk Central. And when I tell you that monetizing Twitter was a mistake, this was so bad for sports media. Because the thing is that aggregation takes away clicks from these newspapers, from these journalism sites, and you might not think that that's important. It really does add up, because, walk with me here. This here, let's say this here, this tweet, 24,000 likes, right? Now, I'm not saying that that's directly 24,000 clicks being taken away from an article that's not really being calculated or whatnot. It's hard to gauge how many people actually kept clicking on the link to this article, because the thing about aggregation is sometimes whatever you read in the tweet is enough and you're like, oh, okay, I get the gist of it, I don't have to read the actual article. So with that being said, this Twitter account is being paid to take quotes from podcasts, articles, or interviews, and since they have a bigger platform, they're able to be like, oh, the Dunk Central tweeted this, whatever. So for the most part, even the stories that are being told in the NBA are just being like clipped, the important parts. A lot of this gets taken out of context just to stir up more controversy, to stir up more views, get more retweets, so this account can make money and the original article doesn't really make that much money. So you see how it feels kind of backwards when I think about it, because you know that no matter like all the research, all the resources, all the heart that goes into like writing these articles, writing these stories, you know that there are going to be a lot of Twitter accounts that are going to just take that and run with it, and then there are going to be a lot of bigger accounts that are going to take the quote, put it in a graphic, and also be able to use that to get that sweet engagement. And I feel like when that happens, the person that actually wrote the article might not get the same amount of traction, because a lot of people have been like, yeah, I didn't need to read this because it's already summarized up. So I think that aggregation also plays a really big part in why NBA media is where it is now. I also remember when Stephen A. Smith got on his knees to beg Anthony Davis to be healthy and beat the Nuggets because he didn't want to go to Denver. That happened. I just wanted to remind you, because sometimes these fan bases are like, oh, the media is out to get you, the media doesn't like your team, and for a lot of times you're like, no, but when you see stuff like this, it's like, yeah. So if this is what the media landscape looks like and you don't want it to look like this anymore, what do you do? Well, the first thing you can do is support local journalism. Now, I know that a lot of you are gonna be like, what? No, this is the way. If you want the most coverage of whatever sports team you want, you have to find the people that are closest to it. That's basically it. Now, prices vary on these establishments, but they're not that much. And what you're doing is you're basically saying, hey, I support this coverage, I want to read about this team or whatnot. You want like the full access from your team, especially if the outlet has a beat reporter that's there for every home game, most of the away games. They're the ones asking the questions, they're the ones with the close access. That's where the storytelling truly lies locally. Remember that now. I honestly do not want to live in a world with no sports beat writers. Beat reporters are so important, and I cannot stress that enough, because these national news media outlets, these national outlets, often don't have boots on the ground all the time. These places do, but they need help from people like you. So if you're a fan of a team with a local outlet, maybe you should consider subscribing. The next step is supporting your favorite content creators. I'm not just talking about Yeboah. I'm talking about if you do like a YouTube channel and they do have that Patreon, if you do have whatever, maybe consider following them on all of their platforms, because the audience, the engagement, all of that matters when it comes to their AdSense, when it comes to getting brand deals or being able to do sponsored content. All of that helps go towards keeping the lights on for certain content creators, especially if they are going full time. So being able to support local journalism, being able to support your favorite content creators. I know it's very easy to enjoy all of this stuff for free, but I can't understate how important support goes. It goes such a long way, and I appreciate you guys all for watching, and I hope that I have helped kind of navigate this media sea. If you do have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'll see you guys later. Love you guys. Bye.